Hello, everybody out there in radio land. Y'all are listening to Media Cyphers only on 89.1 WITR or online at widerfm.org. You might also be watching us on YouTube or listening to us, the Media Cyphers Kalamazoo podcast. As always, the following thoughts, views, and opinions are not necessarily those of 89.1 WITR or Western Michigan University, no matter how dope or insightful they may turn out to be. So we got a pretty packed show for y'all. We're joined by co-host Norah. Hasn't happened in a minute. Norah, how are you doing this very muggy afternoon here in the Midwest?
I'm doing okay. It is indeed very hot and muggy here in Chicago as well, but I'm happy to be on the show again. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. And we are also joined once again by Lawrence. Lawrence, how you doing?
Doing pretty well. Uh, doing pretty well.
Yeah, yeah. So as you can imagine, we're going to spend some time talking about the DNC. Last week we did a couple of stories about it. It was mostly just like I didn't talk too much about the convention itself. It had just been getting started. I was doing a
Can
little bit
can we
more
do an
historical
enjoyable
context.
quick hit?
Oh,
Can we do a
sure.
small quick hit?
Let's do a quick hit
Uh,
right before
just
that.
a small before we get into a lot of very sad and dark stories and very troubling stories. I just want to say, if you saw the Olympics and you saw everything that happened around the Olympics, especially with the controversy of the female boxer. Uh, she is suing J.K. Rowling and Donald Trump and others for liable defamation and slander on her character. And I just want to say, look at God, won't they do it? And that's about
Uh,
that's all. That's all. That's all. They're getting
uh,
sued, and I hope that she takes all their money.
yes,
Right with you there.
I think you like they just tweeted they went radio silent for about a week and a half and then they tweeted another like transphobic barb at Amani and like yeah I really hope her and our legal team just treat that bigot like an ATM, just
Yeah.
stack up every time they say some nonsense.
She's about
Just
to get another gold medal.
mm, mm, mhm,
Dog, so
yeah.
I want to. The only reason why I'm bringing this, I brought that up because as someone who was a three sport athlete, as someone who wrestled, who did football, who did track, who helped friends out with mixed martial arts. I've done a lot of violent sports. I've also done a lot of violent sports where there were females because of my weight class. I end up sparring with and having matches with, right? It is degrading and insulting to every athlete that's in the Olympics to think that some average person from the butthole side of Utah can just roll up to the Olympics and just participate in a sport. Not thinking about the logical dissonance, the logical disconnection that you have to have. Forgetting the fact that you have to diet, you have to train, you have to do research, you have to study, you have to do all these things, and then you have to compete in tournaments. Not just one tournament. You got to compete in a year's long length of time of tournaments, and you have to place in the top of all of those tournaments, and you have to win world competitions before you get to the Olympics. Just for someone to be like, "Hey, I'm gonna I'm going to do. I want to compete in the other person's division, in the other ginger's division." You have to be a complete psychopath to think that someone's going to go through all that training. They have to take all the drug tests. They have to spend all the money to go to international competitions just to get to the Olympics and pull the old switcheroo. Like, dog, tell me you don't know. Tell me you know nothing about sports without knowing
Okay.
nothing about sports. Like,
So
for
not
real.
only that, not only that, there's no scientific first of all, let's also if we're talking about the Olympics, let's also mention that trans people have been banned from the Olympics and it's technically illegal to be trans in Algeria. So there's no way Amani Khalif would be the one to but try to
Slip
pull the
through the
switcheroo
cracks.
in the first place. Exactly. But also, like, there's no scientific evidence to show that trans people are any better at sports than the cis people of the same gender, right? Like,
Right.
that fact alone should be, very much a deal breaker. But like, people just don't understand. Like a lot of cis people specifically don't understand that much about how gender or hormones work. So yeah, it was an easy culture point to get people on, and yeah, I think that's really coming around to bite some of the biggest propagators of this hate campaign. And it really is great to see them finally face some repercussions because they were transphobic, even if it was just now because they were transphobic to a cis woman this time.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's the other thing. I'm glad you brought it up. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Andy, to cut you off. But this narrative, D.L. Hughley, the comedian, once said, "The worst place for Black people to be is in white people's imaginations." So I'm going to expand that. It's minorities. The worst place for a minority to be is in white people's imaginations, because
Absolutely.
it's because it's not outside of using transphobia as a way to scare people about the icky people, right? Or whatever, as they are trying to call it. You have a fundament. You have those same people say that same thing about the cis women that was about the United States rugby team, right? Because one of their players is a very muscular woman. They said the same thing about Simone Biles. They said the same thing about Michelle Obama recently at the RNC, saying that that person is trans. They will weaponize the fear of trans people on cis women, particularly women of color, to otherize them and to harm them. And some of those cis women have gotten killed. There was a story in Texas of a cis woman got killed by their neighbors because their neighbor thought they were trans. So it does real world harm.
Yeah, and I think you really tie it together pretty well in the fact that, like, yeah, it's also tied to like very racist conceptions on what womanhood's supposed to look like. And when you look at a lot of these examples of people who are suspected of, quote unquote, suspected of being trans, like a lot of them tend to be women of color. So it's really, a roundabout way for people to get away with being racist on top of everything else.
Yeah. Oh, and then when the right wing doesn't like you, they also think you're trans. Ask Andrew Tate and what's his
Kyle,
name?
Kyle Rittenhouse, something like that.
Yeah. Ask them when MAGA turns on you, they think that you paid for a sex change too. It's ridiculous. But anyway, I'm sorry. That quick hit
Yeah.
took longer than
Oh,
expected.
that's quite all right. I mean, I will say, just as a side note, there is some nice bit of Schadenfreude to see, like, it's almost like QAnon levels of nonsense coming from these like anti-trans bigots, and how they basically turn into an Ouroboros, like a snake eating its own tail, cannibalizing each other. It's like, it's magnifying glass. Look at your genitals. So, well, yeah. So that's going on in the background of everything else that's been going on this week and the Olympics. I one other quick hit before we get to the DNC, because I actually think this kind of ties in to some
Oh,
of what
that
we're going to.
Snoop Dogg is doing the most side missions of anybody. I just want to say
Oh,
that before we
that,
go on.
yeah,
He is Uncle
uh,
Snoop. Uncle
yeah.
Snoop is on the greatest GTA side missions I've ever seen in my entire life.
Yeah. So I wanted to, and this is going to kind of tie into some of our discussion of DNC, because like a big thing that they are talking about is all the speakers had this message, most of them did, about how the Democratic Party the Democratic Party needs to win so we can preserve democracy. Trump is an existential threat to democracy, and they're not necessarily wrong. They're not just being scaremongering. But how do they actually put these principles into practice? And here in our backyard here in Michigan, there's a story that I just saw before we started the show. Cornell West, they were trying to knock Cornel West off the ballot. A judge has ruled that Cornel West will be on the ballot in November. And basically, the long and short of it, they got what Cornel West campaign got the right number of signatures, and they tried to argue presidential candidates are not required to file affidavits of identity. They were trying to argue that they did. And they also rejected the state's findings that West's affidavit was incorrectly notarized. And what they essentially they and I will explain who they is in a sec. We're trying to use these like procedural things to knock Cornel West off the ballot. And the they is very important. Who was this? Just like a few individuals who, maybe thought like, hey, let's try to get third parties off the ballots because it will help the Democrats. It was the highest echelons of the Michigan Democratic Party. We had Democratic Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson backing up a voter who pushed this suit, and a Democratic aligned political action committee. So you have these lawsuits being sprung, and this was not just in Michigan. They've had some degree of success in other states like Pennsylvania. They are trying to litigate independent candidates and third parties off the ballot. And we can have a deeper discussion about the efficacy of third-party politics, and I've had some criticisms about how Cornel West has run his campaign, but it definitely undercuts your whole thesis about being the party of democracy when you are using these pretty shady tactics to try to what do you want to call it, monopolize the marketplace of ideas. Because again, the Democrats are all about, like, we're capitalists, right? That's what Nancy Pelosi said. We do what uh aren't we supposed to let these ideas duke it out on the national stage? Well, I mean, of course, I'm being facetious, but the answer is no. And while they are simultaneously pointing at Donald Trump and how he wants to kind of get rid of the pretenses of democracy we currently have, they are simultaneously trying to narrow the actual democracy that's going to be available to us in November. Just again, something to think about as we're going to be talking about some of these other issues related to the DNC.
Yeah, I distinctly remember Michelle Obama at the DNC saying a line about how, oh, we don't change the rules to, to our advantage like the Republicans do. And well, how would you explain why there's almost no 30-party candidates on the Illinois ballot, for example? Well, that's exactly what happened in New York as well. And it's just very upsetting to see. And I think that, like, with this election especially, both before and after swapping out Biden for Harris, like, I think there's still it's still a very much a none of the above election where this could, like, really benefit people if they want to express their options that way. Now, I'm not going to tell anybody who to vote for specifically, but if you were to ask me, I do feel like it's better to vote third party than to sit on the couch for similar reasons that the uncommitted movement was able to threaten the DNC and show them how many people who are willing to actually use their vote are willing to go against the establishment. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yes, yeah, and of course, there's this whole idea from the Democratic Party that any candidate running to the left of them, those votes are somehow owed to them, and I mean, that's a pretty spurious logic. Because, like, as you mentioned, a lot of those same people would either leave the line blank or stay home on the couch. Um, Lawrence, do you have any thoughts on this?
Um, well, shout out to Kyle Kalinske. He talked about he talked about the story, and also shout out to Jordan Sheridan on Status Coup. He interviewed Dr. Cornel West, and the Harris camp allegedly was trying to buy him off, either getting him a cabinet position or paying off his debt, his campaign debt, if he was to endorse her. So, like, politics is dirty. Politics is Machiavellian. I'm not mad at the players. I am mad at the system. I'm mad at the game. If we had free and fair election, if we had ranked choice voting, if we had free and fair elections, then the dirtiness of this game, it will still be dirty, but it will be a lot more fair. Like I'm not like I don't like the fact that the Democratic Party is acting this way, but at the same time, if you the top of the ticket wasn't backing a genocide where a large portion of the constituents of the state wasn't directly impacted by, then you wouldn't have these issues. Then we wouldn't be having these problems. 20 to 25%. 20 to 25% of your own voters during the primary said, nah, we good, fam. No, 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 we're good, fam. This ain't it. And the fact that instead of just lying, placating them symbolically, you know, you then try to turn to the person, you try to sabotage the person who has always had an anti imperialism, anti war stance. You try to shame the person who's always stood on business and stood on principle. Even if you agree or disagree. Now, to be honest with you, I agree with a lot more of Dr. Cornel West politics than I do Miss Harris. I'm not gonna lie to you. But at the same time, I also understand. I'm just like, look, I am upset that they have to go through this, but you should be winning on the message. You should win on the message, on your message of what you're going to do for the people, and let the chips fall where they may. But that's not how our system works. That's never how our system works. Because if that was the case, Jamal Bowman, and Cory Bush would still be in Congress. And they're not. Like
Yeah, no,
our system is dirty. People play dirty games, and this is the reality of what we live with.
yeah, absolutely. And again, it is up to us to try to force either or force this system to be better, or try to build one up, or build one up ourselves. And so with that, um let's go ahead and turn fully now towards the DNC. I know we've got a lot to say about it, and I think what we're going to kind of do, we're just let's kind of uh we'll kind of just express our own kind of highlights and lowlights, mostly lowlights really. um, and some, well, probably I should say more like our biggest observations from, watching the convention, following the reporting on what was going on outside. I wanted to encourage folks to stick around. We will be having an interview with Liano Sharon coming up here after we talk, who was one of the individuals who held up the Stop Arming Israel banner inside the convention. You might have seen his interviews on Democracy Now! Or The Real News. Um, so I wanted to start off though with, this is from some coverage from Democracy Now! I think it's a pretty good way to frame this conversation we're about to have. This is from Juan Gonzalez, he's a reporter for Democracy Now!, but he's also like a veteran activist, organizer, and lefty journalist. And he was actually at the famous Democratic Convention in '68, which there were a lot of comparisons to that. This one did not end up being nearly as rowdy as that one was historically, but as somebody who has been literally following these conventions for half a century, I thought this insight was particularly palpable. This is what Juan Gonzalez said. I think one of the things that struck me most was the level of choreographed masked spectacle of this convention that would really be worthy of Leni Riefenstahl, the famous Nazi, Hitler's filmmaker and propagandist, in terms of controlling the narrative that the American people receive of what the Democratic Party is about. We've seen that both the Republican convention and the Democratic convention show the two faces of American capitalism. On the one hand, with the Republicans, you have a party of white supremacist capitalism, of anti immigrant xenophobia, of patriarchy, and of war on the working class. And now, this past week, we've seen the party of a multiracial neoliberal capitalism. for a party that seeks a kinder and gentler form of mass deportation and border militarization, and one that is even more aggressive in the imperial policies of the United States than even the Republican Party, if you consider that. And both parties sort of have a disconnect with the rest of the world. I was stunned by all the chants of USA, USA throughout the Democratic convention, when the reality is that the United States has never been lower in its prestige and never more discredited around the world than it is today as a result of, especially of the war in Gaza, but of all the attempts at regime change and controlling other countries and forcing other countries to do what it wants. So, just thinking through that, and again, something that you can see, a lot of us had colleagues there, a lot of us had friends there, both on the inside and outside, and something I heard over and over again, just the level of, as Gonzalez said, the way it was tightly choreographed. They did not want to have dissent or really rowdy discussion, everything being a united front, and even a lot of the politics they did put on display. And we'll be talking a little bit about the actual speeches and whatnot in a minute here. A lot of the politics they put on display and the politics they chose not to was very telling about the kind of neoliberal capitalist politics this party wants to push. So with that, I'll say I think I want to give it to Norah a little bit. I know you had a lot of people in your community out there. You were in the general metropolitan area. So maybe you want to just kind of kick it to you first, and then we'll just kind of get the discussion rolling from there.
Yeah, so I am very proud of the city that I live in and how they really went to show up in terms of protesting outside the DNC, and even on the or a bit before the DNC. There's a Day Zero march, which I also saw had some really powerful speeches to it. So, like hundreds of thousands of people in total showed up throughout the week. It was incredible, amount of turnout. Very much of a strain on police resources, which you love to see. However, there was definitely some what's the best way I can put this? There was a little bit of infiltration from what I heard. Like there was this group called CRS, for example, that went to the Day Zero March, hosted by Bodies Outside of Unjust Law as a coalition for that is pro-Palestine, pro women's rights, pro-LGBT. And the CRS group is a bunch of people in green vests who are claiming to be part of the safety team, even though the Bodies March group had their own safety team. Now, it was later found out that they were part of the Department of Justice and basically operate as paid government peace police in order to suppress protests and take a fake, pretend to be neutral, as well as the fact that they work with law enforcement shows that they're there to either surveil, confuse people, and report people to the police if necessary. And when they were confronted by the organizers, they refused to take off their vests and hats to give people a false idea of safety at these marches. Again, the police and the DOJ being the main danger to any real protester. So I think that it shows an evolution on the strategy that the federal government will use to suppress dissent. There was similar stuff happening at the march on the DNC coalition as well. It is, and I will also say it's a good thing to try to prevent protesters from being arrested, but you still want to make sure that you try to be disruptive of an event such as this, which I think that there's a lot of similar stuff happening during the week as well, based on what I've heard. And I think that's a big reason as to why these 2024 actions weren't as quote unquote rowdy as things were back in '68. Although and of course there's some exceptions as well. I know that the action that was taken outside of the Israeli consulate in Chicago was certainly more disruptive, but also led to a lot of police brutality and a lot of kettling by the police, a lot of people getting their heads bashed in. A ton of people were arrested. And throughout the entire week, there was a total of around 76 people that are arrested, I want to say. people were having to like go to the hospital for police beating them up. Uh, yeah, the rest were 2 on Sunday, 13 on Monday, 59 on Tuesday, and 2 on Thursday, according to the National Lawyers Guild of Chicago. Also, several people charged with misdemeanors as well as 4 felonies. LG Chicago received reports of several people who were injured as a result of the police attack on Tuesday. So yeah, like local officials trying to paint this as a success for protecting freedom of speech is just frankly not true, and it's just a stain on the record of an otherwise progressive mayor that we have here in Chicago.
Yeah, I know. I mean, thank you for echoing that. I know. I didn't hear too many stories about that sort of infiltration and whatnot. And I think that's really an important aspect of, it's important. OPSEC is what a lot of us activists talk about, and especially thinking through like forward into the election. There's probably still going to be more protests. It is always important to understand, not that you should snitch jacket people or assume that they could be offended, but like this is something that happens. People try to infiltrate these protests. I saw some reports of kind of these right-wing journalists wearing keffiyehs over their face, trying to infiltrate and either like get information to dox people with,
Oh yeah,
or
I heard about that too.
Mhm. So always be very careful about who you're giving your information to and who sees you and all that stuff. Uh, uh,
And don't go to protest alone. Bring a buddy. Bring someone who will go with you. Like wear a mask, wear sunglasses, wear a hat. Keffiyehs are great for covering your head, cover your tattoos. All things like these are basic, like protest safety etiquette, as well as be careful of who you talk to about whether or not you actually go to one of these.
Yeah, absolutely. Careful what you post about on Facebook and all that social media. There's several stories. Something out of Oregon. I don't have it in front of me, but local police department had a unit where they were literally just keeping track of social media activity from like local leftist organizers. Again, weren't committing any crimes or anything. Just, the cops, I guess, wanted to see what dank memes they were sharing around. But yeah, like that's a real thing. And whether Trump or Harris is going to win in November, I think it'd be naive of us to expect that like state surveillance is only going to ramp up. Everything we've seen over the course of this year is really pointing in that direction. Seeing the TikTok ban and the escalation of uh, oppression on people and students in particular protesting against the genocide in Gaza. These things are probably going to escalate, and I would encourage all our listeners. If you are an organizer, activist, or think about being one, you look up the history of stuff like COINTELPRO, and how the FBI tracked social movements in the '60s. They've gotten a little more subtle since then, and with everything being online and the kind of surveillance state, they don't have to use quite the same methods that they used to. But yeah, just don't say anything online or over the phone that you wouldn't want read back in a court. That's that's a good rule of thumb I usually tell people.
Yeah, it's great advice. And just, the exercise caution. There's plenty of guides in this as well. And best of luck. Like, keep fighting the good fight. Like, don't give up. Like, there's always a chance to like show up for your community one way or another. Even if you're not on the front lines, you can still like, make food for people. You can help plan, other resources like bring water. There's a lot of things you can do without like being a direct disruptor if that's not something that's accessible to you for one reason or another.
Yep, absolutely. So I think Lawrence had to dip out. He might be dealing with some car problems. But I think while have you with Nora, let's maybe talk a little bit about what happened inside the convention center as
Of
well.
course.
So um, some of the things that I wanted to hit on in particular, you have again bringing back up this idea of the Democratic Party. you know, wanting to present themselves as, you know, we are the champions of democracy. And, you know, we saw again our colleague Liano, who actually both of us used to work with back in the day. One of their
That's right.
one of their colleagues got bonked on the head by some pro Biden, pro Harris person while they are effectively trying to do this protest. I think they're actually filing a grievance right now with the Democratic committee. Um,
So
I
what
do,
specifically happened was I just want to like add some additional context. Liana was involved in an action inside the DNC where they dropped a banner. I believe it was during Biden's speech, a banner that said basically saying "Stop sending arms to Israel," and a lot of other DNC participants were holding up "We Love Joe" signs. Now the other DNC participants were either trying to block the banner with their "I Heart Joe" signs, but another one, and again you can see this on video. This was like widely shared. You see another like DNC MF like literally trying to hit the protesters with the "We Heart Joe" sign. Like you cannot find a more on the nose example of what the difference between a liberal and and a leftist really is, you know?
yeah, absolutely. And you know, I think one of the things that you know was discussed after was, is there going to be a Palestinian American speaker at the DNC? And they gave them several reasons not to. It's like, oh, it's not on the table, it's not in the cards. Can we have a meeting? Can we have a sit down? There's even, I mean, this sounds pretty on what's the word I'm looking for? This seems pretty on script for the Democratic Party, but I think even one of the campaign handlers, it's like, we don't, this is Kamala's big night. We don't want to mess it up with like what, bad vibes. Yeah, I guess genocide is bad vibes, that's true. But you know, they also, I mean, they gesture to the fact that they did have a panel on Palestinian rights for the first time in the DNC's history. And even Michigan's own Andy Levin went on at some length to comment on that and kind of point to it as, you know, like, hey, the history, kind of reminded me of like that Martin Luther King quote of like, you know, the arc of history bends toward justice, but it bent very slowly. And as well attended as that panel was, and it was, and as much as the actual crowd of the DNC seemed to be on the side of a ceasefire. Anytime a ceasefire was mentioned, anytime Palestinians' rights or the right of Palestinian people not to be massacred was gestured towards, you heard thunderous applause from the crowd. So the base is there. The base is at the place. They are at that place, and we're not even talking about like ultra leftists like you and me. We're talking about the people who are literally card carrying members of the Democratic Party. This is where they're at. And what we saw was, you know, some pretty incredible gaslighting from Democratic Party. And you know, I'm also thinking about that article you sent to the chat really hits the nail on the head in a lot of ways, talking about how we have a party that, while I'm starting to see a stronger strain of anti-imperialism among even kind of the Democratic Party liberals, especially younger people. The upper echelons of the party seem to be doubling down on imperialism in some really obvious ways. Before I get too ahead of myself, Nora, kind of taking what I was just talking about, what were some of your observations? You know, some things that really struck me were you know, AOC speech in particular, I have had some issues with, and of course, you know, Harris's as well. But maybe if you could think through what, you know, what you were, I'm sure you were following the events of the convention. Maybe some of your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so I did was certainly following the events of the convention in terms of like what was significant and who wasn't there on the main stage. I should specify that I did not watch the full thing because that would frankly be very boring. The convention goes on for 8 hours a day with like back-to-back speeches that like you know, a lot of them like would only be for 5 minutes and a lot of people saying a lot of the same stuff. So like it doesn't feel like it's worth watching the whole thing. However, considering it is that long and that like uninteresting, there's absolutely no reason as to why they wouldn't be able to fit a Palestinian speaker into the schedule. Even like a pre-approved speech that was already going to endorse Harris. In fact, they they had to release a speech that she would have given. Like they had like a delegate, like an uncommitted delegate that would have been able to get the speech, but like again, they like canceled her last minute, and she was an elected Palestinian representative from Georgia. I'm blanking on her name, but you can read her speech online. It's very powerful. We'll pull that up soon. And yeah, they just wouldn't let her do that. But you know who they would let bring up there? You know who they would let speak on the stage? Why? Oh, you have a couple of guesses, Andy?
Are you referring to the parents of the hostage? Because I had some thoughts on that too, but I don't know if that's well, also
Oh
like all
yeah.
the Republicans, but I don't know which way were you going with that. But
Okay, so I just want to emphasize that like yes, they had family members of the hostages, but who, by the way, also said that they should have allowed Palestinian speakers as well. The
yeah,
those hostage parents
that's
were
crazy.
themselves pro ceasefire,
If you go
which is
back and
also crazy to
listen,
think about. Yes.
if you go back and listen to their speech, something that really struck me, it's like these people whose son is literally being held hostage by Hamas seem to actually have more empathy for Palestinians than the Democratic Party does. So,
Absolutely.
yeah, mhm.
Like, but not only that, they invited like several anti-choice Republicans. They brought Trump's former press secretary. They brought a war criminal on Epstein's flight logs, an anti-immigrant border sheriff, several other cops, a CI director, a bank CEO, an Uber exec, and they would not allow any Palestinian speakers. And something that might have flown under the radar is this was also the first DNC since 2012 to not feature a trans person speaking. Like there was almost no mentions of trans people in the DNC at all, but like it went down to two lines, like two like off mentions that really shows how low of a priority this is shaken out to be for Democrats. And like it really upsets me. I mean, I'm not trying to detract from like the importance of stopping the Gaza genocide either. I would never do that, but it really does upset me personally to see how low of a priority trans rights is for both liberals and leftists across the board.
Well, I mean, it's definitely something worth highlighting because especially this reactionary right has put trans people in their crosshairs for the last like half decade in particular. And the fact that there's no like full-throated response to that from the opposition party, it tells you a lot by omission. And I saw a number of tweets talking about like, oh wow, they really, threw Palestinian trans people under the bus for this, because when the other side is trying to, play the Nazi playbook, paint a marginalized group as like, oh, they're pedophiles, groomers, and this and that, XYZ. It is the job of, not even like the radical left, but like anybody who is opposed to those kind of fascist politics to say that is wrong, that is incorrect, that is a lie. These people are our neighbors. The closest we got to it was Tim Waltz kind of saying something like, mind your own business. And, um, you know, his hit, just an aside, um, he probably should have said something more about it because he used to run a chapter of the GSA. So that was particularly disappointing. Um, but no, I think absolutely it was a glaring omission in this environment where trans people are um, literally under attack, and the Democratic Party didn't have anything to say about it.
Yeah, just last week, Texas decided to stop like block gender marker changes, even if people have court orders, which is unprecedented, like almost on a state level. And again, like the Democrats, at least on the federal level, aren't counter messaging to this, and it really like increased my distaste for federal Democrats. To be fair, a lot of the state level ones aren't nearly as bad on this issue, but again, it's like I think it also telegraphs, I want to say, like what issues they'd be willing to compromise on in the near future. Because if you notice the rhetoric in both some of Harris's campaign ads as well as this convention, she really is trying to like double down on being tough on the border and adopting a lot of the policies that Biden ran against Trump on in 2020. Like there's very like we were watching the ratchet effect happen in real time, in that Democrats are moving very quickly to the right on immigration in a way that was would have been unthinkable in 2016 if for those of us with longer memories. But yeah, it's another reason why, like, it's an authoritarian turn on the Democrat side to want to increase surveillance and border quote unquote security and policing, and to build up the quote most lethal military in the world, because that's something that got a lot of cheers and excitement in the DNC halls.
Yeah, it's even more disturbing because like the border crisis is literally fascist propaganda. It's made up. There is no border crisis. The only border crisis is the humanitarian crisis we've created by not letting people seek asylum. And
Absolutely.
by basically rubber stamping it and saying this fascist narrative is true, you've basically in the Democratic Party, instead of doing some basic fact checking that it doesn't take long. You can Google the stuff. Immigrants commit less crimes than native citizens. Most fentanyl is being smuggled in by U.S. citizens. It's like it takes 2 seconds to Google this stuff. Nobody on the national stage said that, and in fact, again, they just gave support to this fascist lie about what's going on at the border. And it's very disturbing, especially from a party that spent most of 2020 campaigning on, the brutality at the border. And when we have people in states like Texas that are setting up saw-like death traps on the Rio Grande, this is not the kind of rhetoric that anybody needs. Um, I wanted to mention just real quickly. I mentioned AOC's speech, and I did want to hit on that real quick. And I kind of just want to juxtapose it with like her and Bernie Sanders, and the way that the DNC used their progressive speakers. And AOC really just you know really came out strong at trying to like cheerlead for the Kamala Harris administration and outright gaslit people about not only what they've done, but what they intend to do. And maybe, most egregiously, that line about working tirelessly for a ceasefire was absolutely wrong. And, it hit in a different way that it wouldn't if it came out of the mouth of, just a typical Democratic politician, because AOC for the last 6 years has really been the avatar of the insurgent democratic socialist left, the left that is willing to work inside the Democratic Party, the kind of moderate left of the United States. And to hear those words come out of their mouths, it really like, I've kind of felt this way since they voted against the rail strike, but it's like you could feel the sellout vibes. I mean, again, on a national stage, on national television, to the point where even like one of her quote unquote squad colleagues had to call them in check. Ilhan Omar basically responded to that the next day. It's like that's a lie, and anybody who claims they've been working tirelessly for a ceasefire should be ashamed of themselves. Um, and then you had Bernie, who he also did a little bit of that kind of lifter, but to his credit, he stuck to the facts. He stuck to progressive policy stuff that actually got done in the last 4 years under Biden. And his speech seemed more like, I'm going to go out, I'm going to give my typical stump speech against the billionaires. And it was less him telling you, here's what Harris and Waltz are going to do. It's more him saying, like, this is what they should do if we want to defeat Trumpism and have like a strong party, which didn't have the gaslighting vibes that AOC's speech did. Uh, don't know if you have a direct response to that, Norah, but it's just something I was thinking about going back, reading some of the speeches from last week.
Yeah, I do. I do it. I didn't like watch that many of the speeches, But I do think it is very dishonest to claim that like Biden and or Harris are working tirelessly on a ceasefire, because you wouldn't have to work tirelessly on a ceasefire. If you got an arms embargo, there'd be a ceasefire tomorrow, and you can bleep the rest of it off if you wanted to. You know what I'm saying? It's just really disingenuous. And I had that same feeling even before even before AOC's speech. And the reason like why this is like kind of an unconventional example, right? So I was at Lollapalooza, not to brag or anything, but I was at Lollapalooza a couple of weeks back when that came to Chicago. Of course, I had a great time. And Megan Thee Stallion was one of the headliners, and she recently endorsed Kamala Harris from herself not too long before then. And she was talking about like, oh, people were really mad about me doing highs for Harris. And then she like gave some examples of like why she likes Harris. And like she tried to claim that she was for a ceasefire, and like people cheered. And yeah, it's great that people cheer for wanting a ceasefire, but like it's just not true that Harris really wants one, because again, it would have happened by now, you know? Like obviously Joe Biden's not mentally well enough to to pull the strings of the country in the first place. Like he's a teleprompter guy. Like we've all seen this. But yeah, so it's a very much something on like a lot of like party officials and even like celebrities will try to push. Again, no disrespect to the Queen. I still love Megan Thee Stallion and her music, but like people should be honest about what our politicians are and aren't materially supporting.
Yeah, and if there was one through line, just like this convention was weirdly jingoistic. I mentioned earlier, like
Oh,
USA, USA.
absolutely.
It's like this is like the Republican Party of 20 years ago under Bush. Like that's one thing I thought about, because I remember I was a political nerd when I was a teenager, and I would watch that stuff, and like this feels like one of Bush's conventions. This is so bizarre because they are, I mean, granted, they are giving lip service to some progressive domestic policies, but they have really doubled down. Like Kamala's speech talking about we have the most lethal military in the world.
That was so
Um,
weird.
that's so messed up. Like I remember like the drone program under Obama and things like that. Like that's not something you want to throw out there. And
Absolutely. Like,
uh
especially when people are upset about like genocides happening. You don't want to, that's not the time to flex your military when you're the one giving military aid to, a mass ethnic cleansing campaign. And I think another way that we can draw a similarity to this convention and the Bush administration is that the DNC, for the like on the DNC platform they released for the first time ever, removed their opposition to the death penalty. Like that's something that hasn't happened for years and years. They also removed their opposition to like torture programs specifically, something that's also very concerning. It really does feel like, the IOF just wrote their whole platform at this point, you know?
no, no, yeah, for real. And um so I'm going to talk about this with Liana a little bit, but yeah, there's some basic fact checking on everything Harris had to say about Gaza. But at the end of the day, like something that troubles me with that is, so like a good thing, bad thing. It's like I'm seeing the emergent left, the young left, especially becoming more naturally internationalist in a way that I did not see in 2020 or 2024, or no, 2020 or 2016. While it's almost like the party is trying to get ahead of it and try to move the momentum in another direction. It's like, hey, I could sum up the convention like this. You, the Democratic Party is basically saying, hey, we're going to give you a little bit of a social safety net as a treat. Thoughts and prayers to the people being massacred in a genocide. We're going to continue to materially support. And it almost seems like they're trying to inoculate their base from getting further and further into internationalism because, again, not to say like they think this far ahead, but if you really sit down and think about what the next 4 years are going to look like under Harris or Trump, in the next 4 years after that, we're entering a period where of climate breakdown, of scarcer resources. If we get any sort of green energy plans, where's that lithium going to come from? Attempts
Exactly.
attempts to stage soft coups in places like Bolivia and Venezuela have failed. So, could this presage a more overt era of American imperialism, more similar to the late 19th and early 20th century? Are we actually going to be sending boots on the ground to get juice for our car batteries? Is this kind of what we're being set up for? It's something I was thinking about. Kind of, it's like, why are they ratcheting it up? This imperialist rhetoric so much, and it could just be, again, as the cost of doing business. They go read Smedley Butler. This war is a racket. If you read Kamala's speech and then read that after it, you'll start making a lot of connections.
Yeah, what I saw, like somebody tweeted that like the Lockheed Martin stock went way up like after Kamala's speech at the convention. Yeah, and like captioning it the most terrifying image you could possibly see. And yeah, it's pretty chilling to see indeed. It's also like, I want to say, like, this sort of like increased level of warmongering rhetoric coming from the Harris campaign and from federal Democrats largely is really going to hurt them in the election. Like, a lot of polls are saying that like backing an arms embargo, first of all, would help Harris win 3 swing states like Pennsylvania and Georgia and Arizona. Again, very important to the election. Obviously,
I'm
Michigan as
surprised you
well.
didn't
I
say
don't.
Michigan, but yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, that's. I mean, again, obviously, that's going to be the case in Michigan. This is just what the article I'm looking at refers to. Like, and she's going to have to win all 3 of those states if she doesn't win Michigan. I have a. It's not going to be an easy electoral battle without winning Michigan. Like, she really should listen to the state, or else she's going to have to find out just how difficult things are going to be there in the rest of the country. Anyways, not to get too sidetracked, but yes, being anti-war is good policy and good politics in this circumstance, because by not supporting an arms embargo, this allows Trump to like change his rhetoric to be like, folks, Democrats have a lot of war happening all the time. Frankly, it's very sad. I would I would do one phone call and it would be over, folks.
That's very
Frankly,
good.
like obviously what he would do actually, like in practice, would be just as bad as what the Dems are doing currently. But like, again, he's able to counter message on a war that, like, really Joe Biden has been like very thoroughly tied to Joe Biden and to Harris at this point. Because even if she did support an arms embargo, like let's say that's the October surprise, like we finally get like a ceasefire, even then it might be hard to win some of those votes back, considering how prolific her snubbing of pro-Palestine activists and politicians at the convention was just recently.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're getting a little bit close to time, and we're going to have a really packed show today, especially if you're listening on the radio. Kind of extra innings. We're going to do at least 2.5 hours. So I do want to kind of wrap this up. Norah, do you have any kind of final thoughts on the convention? I know you shared something in the group chat. It was a very powerful speech. I don't know if you want to draw some from that or just maybe close out with your own thoughts.
Yes. So I wanted to like have point everybody to a speech done by Iman Abdullahani's speech from the Bodies Outside of Unjust Laws demonstration on the 18th, called And Now They Want Our Votes. Give it a good read. Incredible, powerful speech. I don't think there's a video of it out there. I was not able to find one before then, but again, And Now They Want Our Votes from the Bodies Outside Unjust Laws March in Chicago.
All right, thank you. And we'll link to that in the show notes. I guess I just want to close by saying, and you may have heard me say this on the show last week, and it didn't end up making it into any of our like YouTube recordings or whatever. So I want to reiterate it. I think it still is relevant given everything we just saw at the convention. The Democratic Party, Kamala Harris, they've told you exactly who they are. They're gonna get pay lip service to ceasefire, but they're not gonna actually do anything. At least right now. Maybe hopefully they'll prove me wrong, and the slaughter can at least end for now. Um, a couple weeks back, or about a week ago, my fiance was sharing a story with me about it was a Palestinian doctor who got precision targeted by an IDF missile, and it killed her entire family except for her husband. And they just had two newborn children. And they targeted the doctor because she had been testifying that the IDF was intentionally killing children. And what really disturbed me about my reaction to that was I kind of just it entered my brain, and throw that into the atrocity compartment, compartmentalization. A lot of us talk about that. And anybody who's even vaguely been following what's been going on in Gaza over the last 10 months has been having to do a lot of that. And it made me, it's one of those moments that made me stop and just the fact that we are forced to live in this situation where our tax money is causing this level of evil, and that we just have to deal with it. And the Palestinians in Gaza have to deal with it. It's tragic and it's sad, and especially all the young people who are listening. Whether you're listening online, listening on radio, maybe you're out there walking around getting ready for Bronco Bash. I want to apologize as an elder millennial that we were not able to stop this yet. That our generation was not able to turn off the spigot of imperial carnage, and that now that responsibility is on your shoulders. Because again, the U.S. empire, it's a behemoth. But here's what needs to happen. You know, I think the working class, we've got this general strike thing coming up in 2028. Part of that absolutely needs to be a working class of this country standing up and saying, not one more penny of our labor towards bombing Gaza, towards staging coups in Latin America, towards regime change wars in the Middle East. Not one more red cent. And for my part, we try to push that message here on the show as much as we can. And I'm hoping and hoping and hoping that the power of the people, the public pressure can play out somehow in the next couple months to stop this carnage that's going on in Gaza. And solidarity to everybody out there who is trying to make that happen.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I agree with you there. I do think a coalition of student encampments, an earlier general strike, I think, and also anti-police brutality activists all coming together would be like just the spark that this needs to, I think, give our biggest push to stop the genocide yet. I After so long of this happening, I don't know what's going to succeed, but I'm fairly confident that something like that will get the goods for us.
Yeah. All right, we're going to leave you that thought. Next, stay tuned. We're going to have our interview with Liana Sharon, who was one of the protesters who hung up the Stop Arming Israel banner. And then stay tuned after that. We're going to have an interview with one of the organizers with the WMU AAUP. It's a union here for assistant professors, and they are in the thick of negotiations with the university. Stay tuned. This is Media Cyphers, your source for political revolution.